Over the past week, I have played 3 Dead Rising games, and let me tell you, I am seeing zombies in my sleep. And also Larry David, but that's not related. It's just something I want to get out there because I don't know why the guy keeps popping up. Enough about that though, I'll save that for my therapist. Now, the Dead Rising franchise was reanimated last year thanks to the release of Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. And since then, it's kinda got me thinking, is Dead Rising the most underrated survival horror series ever? Now, to be clear, when I say the Dead Rising franchise and the most underrated survival horror games, the ones I'm specifically referring to are, of course, Dead Rising 1 and 2. Even though I quite enjoyed 3, it's not a survival horror game, it's just an outright action game with loads and loads of zombies in. So, sorry 3, I like you, but you're going in the bin. Dan, edit me throwing Dead Rising 3 in the bin. I don't have it on me right now, you know? Of course, Dead Rising 1 and 2 are not generally underrated games, so let me explain what I mean by that as well. There is a reason the first has received 2 official remasters since it launched in 2006, but while people remember Capcom's franchise for its brash characters, kill counts in the thousands, and colourful sandboxes, it's rarely ever brought up when we talk about the very best survival horror games. And perhaps that's because Dead Rising as a whole, not incorrectly may I add, has been labelled as being goofy. That's its defining feature. Survival horror games, on the other hand, are usually defined by being intense and scary affairs. You know, your gloomy Silent Hills and claustrophobic Resident Evils. While on the surface, even the more serious Dead Rising games have chainsaw juggling killer clowns and lead characters that deliver one-liners no matter how serious or perilous the situation is. And it might also be because people play Dead Rising very differently depending on what you want from it. In fact, trophy data shows us that just over 10% of players even bother finishing the game to get the true ending. To some people, Dead Rising is just a brainless open world zombie smasher, and don't get me wrong, that is a totally fine way to approach it. The game is made to be approached that way if that's all you want from it. Me though, well, I'm a freak. And by playing Dead Rising as seriously as possible, I reckon you can get one of the most intense and best survival horror experiences on the market. If you haven't played these games in nearly 20 years though, let me give you a quick roundup of what they even are. And let's focus on the first game just for the sake of clarity so I'm not confusing anyone, but just bear in mind that pretty much everything I'm saying about Dead Rising 1 here also applies to Dead Rising 2, which in some ways is even more refined and to many people is the best of the bunch. So in this original game, you play as Frank, a photojournalist trapped in a mall full of zombies. You have 72 in-game hours before a helicopter arrives to pick you up, and in that time, in order to get the true ending anywhere, you need to complete various time-sensitive missions and save survivors that are scattered around the map. Doing this is easier said than done though, as the game's myriad systems all come together to make for a punishing and intense gameplay loop. Though it looks like the emphasis is on skewering thousands of zombies and going on a rampage, Dead Rising is a surprisingly brutal game. Frank, at first, is a fragile character, limited by a lot of the hallmarks of survival horror game design. You have a limited inventory that requires you to balance what you need to survive. Juggling low durability weapons, key items, health, and buffs. You've got checkpoints that are only banked when you visit save rooms that are scattered around the environment. You've got doors that can't be accessed until you've discovered certain keys. And of course, you've got a vanishingly small life bar. Nothing else about Frank is vanishingly small though, let me tell you that.
Fantastic!
Now all of these mechanics serve to make the early hours especially of Dead Rising extremely punishing on the player. Zombies are shockingly aggressive as well, always lunging at Frank, grabbing him, chasing him, and being able to halve his already small health bar in one go if you're not paying attention. Despite there being hundreds on screen at any time, it only really takes one to truly put you in danger. A genius move, IMO, on Capcom's part. You might think that the scale and the sheer volume of enemies on display might make them easy, but that's not the case. While they could have felt like non-threatening fodder enemies, and to be fair, that is what they do become in later entries, the zombies here are genuinely dangerous to navigate and battle against. And that's not helped by Frank's movement either, which is purposefully clunky and difficult to master. Even when you have a weapon, you can't just bash and hope for the best. Each one, in fact, has a different moveset that will leave you vulnerable for different amounts of time. As a result, every swing of a sledgehammer needs to be considered, as the wind up or wind down might not make it worth the trouble. The same is true with even jumping, which leaves you static for a second when you hit the floor, or even using a health item, which locks you in place until the animation completes. No buff or offensive or defensive move comes without a cost of some kind, and choosing the right actions at the right time is essential to mastering the gameplay. You might have the biggest sword in the game, but if you don't know how to swing it, then, buddy, you're gonna be zombie chow. This feeling of being a dumb idiot to slowly mastering the game's mechanics also comes in the design of the mall itself. Initially, well, it's like walking into a mall that you've never been in before. Great analysis, I know, that's why they pay me the big bucks. Once you're dropped in, you have no idea what the layout is, which shops are where the facilities are, or where the food court is. Like all good survival horror games, part of the power curve in Dead Rising comes from the initial feeling of being overwhelmed by the hostile and deadly environment that you're in, and then coming to feel like you own it, like you know it like the back of your hand, which I don't actually understand too much because I don't really know the back of my hand all that well. Being good at this game then means you need to understand how to navigate the mall effectively. You need to know where the shops are that offer you the best weapons for any given situation, the best way to move around each wing without encountering the most danger, and the fastest way to your objective so you're wasting as little time as possible. And as you can imagine, on your first time through, this is going to be very, very tough, leading to a lot of fun improvising and, frankly, a lot of failure. But as you backtrack through areas, you'll start to get a grasp of where the gun shop is, which areas you definitely need to avoid, and which shortcuts you can abuse to quickly get back to the safe room. The mall is so well designed in facilitating this as well, being surprisingly complex and detailed in the amount of avenues and opportunities that it offers you, outside of just the hundreds of core items and resources that you can pick up in every shop and nook and cranny and office room that you find yourself in. And just when you start to master these systems, Dead Rising likes to throw you a curveball. Dan, throw me Dead Rising 3 like this. Curveball. Figure something out there, Dan. What makes the first game especially compelling, even 2 decades on, is its persistent surprises just as the player is getting hang of how to take on zombies, where they need to go, and mastering the core mechanics. Now initially this comes in the form of nighttime sections, with the zombies themselves becoming more aggressive and difficult to put down than they were in the day. Okay, that's not too bad, just hit harder and get hit less. That is manageable. But then, the outdoor area that connects all the different wings of them all together and has otherwise been easily navigatable, has been easy to navigate, becomes the hunting ground for 3 escaped prisoners in a jeep with a machine gun attached to the back. Okay, so then just spend some time to kill them so they're not an issue later on. Wait, what do you mean they respawn? Okay, that's something I'm gonna have to deal with every single time I go outside then, I guess. Okay, so now I've got to rethink my routes. Well, then old areas will become occupied with dangerous human cultists that you have to deal with. And then new bosses will show up in previously conquered areas, and then the military will descend and suddenly you're outnumbered by armor-clad guys with guns who not only can kill you extremely quickly, but can also take you prisoner, rob you of your items, and if you don't escape efficiently, can actually keep you there for in-game hours while the timer for your missions ticks down to 0. And then, there's always something else. Dead Rising, quite simply, never lets you get comfortable for too long, always being keen to introduce something new that will complicate your journey. And even now, playing it in 2025, a lot of players don't want this kind of friction. They just want this game and this franchise to be the zombie-killing sandbox that it begins as, and get frustrated when these other enemies and roadblocks are introduced. Hell, that's the way I felt about it the first time I played the game all the way back in 2006. I was like, hey, what's all of this challenge and survival horrorness doing in my zombie smasher simulator? Now though, these complications for my money are what makes Dead Rising such a compelling and enduring game. Not only is it a trope of the survival horror genre to introduce new enemies and twists just as you're starting to feel confident, e.g. the hunters in Resident Evil, but it keeps the gameplay varied and engaging, ensuring that Dead Rising feels threatening all the way through, no matter how much you level up Frank. And mastering all of these mechanics while dealing with the curveballs that are thrown your way is what makes Dead Rising's survival horror heart pump with blood. In this genre, the joy is taking something that seems insurmountable and slowly learning to be capable. It's about going from panicking and wasting 6 bullets on a zombie to being confident enough to use none and escape without losing any health, saving those bullets for a boss. In this specific case, it's about getting bullied by 100 zombies in hour 1, and then suplexing 10 of them at a time into a water fountain in hour 10. And all of these systems become even more intense when you're fighting against the game's mission design as well. By far the most maligned element of the original game was its NPC survivors. These essentially served as escort missions where you herd useless people to the game's safe room, being able to give them basic orders and supply them with a weapon. And, of course, all the while you're worrying that time spent saving these NPCs will come back to bite you in the arse later on if you get to a main mission late because of it. Now, while the AI was dodgy in the original game, it was still an essential part of the survival horror experience, and, for the most part, makes for some intense gameplay sequences. These sections put all of your mastery of the game to the test, and intensifies it by now making you responsible for not just Frank, but the health bars of up to 8 absolute bozos. It's an optional escalation in difficulty that again complicates your sense of power, as you have to adapt to the strengths and, let's face it, mostly weaknesses of the survivors, having to alter the routes you'd usually take and engage with enemies and areas in an experientially different way. These unscripted moments in how you got a survivor from point A to point B, even when it goes wrong, which it often does, often makes for the game's most compelling stories as well. Each player will have a slightly different way from how they got one of these survivors to the safe room or got them killed along the way, how they planned it out, how they improvised, how they dodged the game's biggest dangers. They're mechanically intense, punishing even, but in the midst of that difficulty as well, the game's humor shines through as things go comically wrong, or you scrape your way through using a ridiculous weapon that you'd otherwise never look twice at. These missions for me are the perfect encapsulation of everything Dead Rising can be. Hilarious chaos that's born from, not in spite of, the title's survival horror roots. What also makes this increased difficulty fun though is that it's kind of designed to still be satisfying even when you lose. The mission system and time limit, alongside the punishments like being captured by the military, mean that there are so many different endings a player can get. You can blow all of the cases, you can do them all and fail to be at the helicopter when it arrives, you can save some survivors and not others, you can allow the villain to detonate bombs under the mall, and all of these outcomes, while technically failures, do result in bespoke endings that pay off the consequences of your actions. And there's also a proto-roguelike quality to Dead Rising because of this structure. With all these different ways to mess up, the game encourages multiple playthroughs. In fact, it sort of expects multiple playthroughs, with it being virtually impossible to see everything in one run. Unless you're the luckiest person in the world, there'll probably be a few unmarked survivors that you miss, and some secret cutscenes that you don't find, not to mention the different endings to acquire as well. And the game builds all of this into its structure, allowing you to restart at any time, carrying over your stats, and of course, the knowledge that you've gained from the hours that you've played. So not only can you jump back in and play the game as a stronger, more capable Frank, but you'll also know what's coming, allowing you to plan better and be more efficient than you were the first time around. Granted, some of these elements definitely could have been implemented more seamlessly. I mean, it is a shame that restarting makes you go through the same opening cutscenes and tutorial, making it a little bit off-putting to actually commit to. But it all still adds to how compellingly deep Dead Rising's gameplay actually is. And all of this is why Dead Rising just clicked with me on that other level so long after I originally played it all the way back in 2006. I like that this is a game that I used to love just because it allowed me to piss about and spend hours exploding zombie heads with golf balls. But now I get to enjoy a whole other side to it, one that actually rewards mastering all of its systems and taking everything, even the goofy stuff, seriously. And I think this is what some of the more recent Dead Rising games miss. There's a genuine depth to the original idea that got flattened out somewhere along the way, and I think that's a bit of a shame. Oh, well, that is my little editorial on the first couple of Dead Rising games. Again, I really like the third one. I don't think it's as good as the first two, but as a proper brainless zombie smasher, you can do a lot worse. The fourth game, though, well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you like playing Dead Rising this way, or are you taking a more casual and goofier approach to it? Like I said, it's designed so that anyone is right in that way, but I love it as survival horror. It is right up there. So, until next time, I've been Josh. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.